Hi everyone, I'm so happy to have you along for what I know will be a valuable time spent for either you or someone in your life that you know and love. I'm Rebecca McQueen from Birth Sense Australia, and I'm incredibly excited to be joined by mental health social worker and family therapist Tiffany Clingin to introduce you to the 5 ways to well-being, which is 5 simple and effective ways to improve your psychological and emotional health. This is a talk that will help each and every one of us, and I can't wait to hear from Tiff about this. Good morning, Tiff.
Hello, it's really lovely to be with you, Beck. Thank you for having me.
I feel very lucky to have you. I'm just so pleased, and I know that I normally do talks that are all about perinatal mental health, pregnancy, all that sort of thing, but in this era of COVID and everything that's going on, this is a talk that will help mums, dads, grandparents, kids, anyone who wants to listen to this talk. So I'm really grateful to you.
You're so welcome.
Tiff, I'm going to tell everyone a little bit more about how clever you are because as well as being a mental health social worker, Tiff's also a teaching member of the Effectiveness Training Institute of Australia. She works in private practice and hosts parent effectiveness training. And she's also enrolled in the Master of Positive Psychology program at Melbourne University. And you can be sure that everything that Tiff discusses with us today is based on extensive research. So Tiff, tell us firstly, we think we know what it is, but what is well-being and is it different for everyone?
I think it's really tricky to define well-being actually, Beck, and even in the literature there's a whole lot of different definitions, but if we boil it down to a very simple answer, it's feeling good and functioning well. So having more positive emotions than the so-called negative ones. Negative ones are fine, but we want them to be outweighed by feeling good. So feelings such as optimism, hope, love. We want more of those, and we want to be able to function well in life, so have good relationships and do well in our work and achieve the things that we set out to achieve. So it's really very, very personal because what well-being for me might feel different to what well-being is for you. But there definitely are, if we look at all of the literature, it comes down to feeling good and functioning well.
It makes good sense.
Yeah.
What would be the benefits of having well-being?
Well, I think for a long, long time, if we go back, there's philosophers, theologians, and everyday people have asked that question, what is the good life? And really well-being is the study of the good life. And I think I can speak for most people when I say that we want to get to the end of our lives and do a review and feel good about it. So I think it's about having a rich and deep experience in the time that we have here together.
And along those ideas of the benefits of well-being, of course, looking back on our lives, it's important to know we've lived a happy life, as all of us want that. But are there certain benefits such as health or, those sorts of specific benefits of having a happy life that can play out?
Definitely. Yeah, so we know that, you and I are going to talk about the 5 ways to well-being today, which came out of a report that was produced in the United Kingdom. And we know that when people have higher levels of well-being, they're far less likely to be anxious or depressed. They live longer, they have less heart attacks. Like, the repercussions are hugely significant when we put time and attention to well-being. And there are definitely governments around the world that are becoming more interested in not just how do we help people cope, but how do we actually help people flourish and achieve their best.
What are the 5 ways?
So it's connection, so reaching out and having a good bond with a circle of significant others. So being able to, and we need some good close relationships, but we also need to belong to, I guess, less significant groups as well. So say, for example, this morning I went for a walk with my girlfriend through the park and I have a close connection with her. But we also at the end stopped into a cafe, respecting social distancing because we're in COVID, the COVID lockdown. But the barista at the shop, I'm familiar with her. And she said hello and she asked how I was and what I've been up to. So we need the close connection like I have with my friend Alison. And we also need to be familiar in a space, in an environment, and have relationships that may feel a little less serious, like my gym friends. I've got friends that I do weightlifting with. We don't tend to gather socially outside of the gym, but they matter to me and I matter to them. So those relationships are important as well. So we need connection is number one. And the second one is activity, movement. We need to be exercising and moving our bodies most days. I think the minimum is 3 times a week, 30 minutes. But we know even if people do a short 10-minute workout, they're going to feel better than if they don't. So we all need to be discovering activities and sports and different kinds of movement that work for us. And I know for me, I like a lot of variety. So I do a bit of walking and a bit of yoga and some weightlifting when we're allowed. And last night I did a body weight class online, and I've walked this morning, and later today, if I've got time, I'll go on the rower. And it's interesting because sometimes people will say to me, oh, Tiff, you seem to exercise a lot. You must care a lot about fitness, but actually it's for my head. We know that movement's very, very helpful for the way we think about ourselves and our life. So movement's number 2 of the 5 ways. And the third one is mindfulness or taking notice. So we want to be absorbed in activities that take our attention. So someone said to me recently that their husband likes getting on the ride-on mower and putting the headphones on and going out and cutting the grass. And so that's an example of an activity that would absorb his attention, and he's unlikely to be interrupted, and he can get into a state that we call flow, where there's a problem that we need to solve. So this morning, my young son Monty was making bread. And when I came home from my walk, he proudly showed this pot of bread. He cooked it in like a casserole container. I've never made bread, so I just looked very curiously at what he'd done. But his shoulders were back. There was a sense of pride, and I'm guessing that will have been an experience that helped him be mindful or be aware and get into flow. So we all need those moments as well. And lifelong learning is number 4, which I love because I just enjoy learning so much, and we all need to be engaged in new discoveries. So an example was when I was at social work school, Brunswick TAFE or Brunswick Tech offered this 10-week course in mechanics. And I remember going along to that, and I learned how to tune a car and how to change a tire and change the oil and brake pads. And it was phenomenal, Beck. And I've never done anything with it since, but it was fantastic to be in a group with other adults, mostly men. I think I was the only woman in the group, but it was just wonderful to learn about something that I knew nothing about before. And so even for Monty learning to bake the bread, that's very, very good for him psychologically. So it pays for us to be curious and trying new things, even if we're terrible at them. Or we don't do anything with it into the future. It's very good for us. So at the moment I can tick that off quite easily because of the study, but it doesn't have to be anything as fancy as going back to university. It could be learning to make a mosaic bowl or anything. It's wonderful. Number 4, lifelong learning. And then the 5th one is giving. We need to be doing kind things for others. And when I looked at the research around that, 1 a week is the guideline. And, you know, you and I were chatting earlier today about you left soup on my doorstep when I was unwell, but that was very significant for me as the receiver. And I'm imagining, Beck, it felt good to do that too. So even you as the deliverer of the soup will have felt good. Buying it in the shop would have created a cascade of hormones inside you that help you feel good. And then for me to go to the doorstep and find it there, I will have got a corresponding cascade of happy hormones. So it's very powerful for us to look out for others.
You're absolutely right. When I do little things like that, there's definitely a win in it for me.
Yeah.
I know that dopamine response kicks in, and that's the hormone that makes you want to do good, and it feels good. And it's something I'm trying to really instill in the kids too, by you can create these feelings. Don't wait for them to come to you. You be the creator. And that's what I'm finding interesting about this research, Tiff, is that I asked you earlier, do you think that by practicing the 5 ways that you've mentioned, that it's preventative or protective against developing mental health issues?
Yes, yeah, and I was looking again at some of the research around that this morning, when they've been teaching wellbeing strategies to young people in Bhutan, and their rates of anxiety and depression in adolescence have come down. And that's not unusual. It's not the only piece of research that shows that. We know that these things make a significant difference, that it matters for us to be connected with others, that helps us feel good, and it matters for us to get out there and move our bodies, even if we're dealing with particular limitations. We can still, I know I had a little bit of surgery last year on the lower part of my body, on one of my legs, and my gym teachers were amazing. I just worked on my upper body for about 4 to 5 weeks while I recovered, and I was really glad that they did that for me. So even when we're dealing with physical limitations, often there'll be things we can still do. So when I've been quite sick, and I did a fair bit of Yin Yoga, which is very gentle, slow movements. The poses are held for minutes at a time. And so even though I was unwell, there was still this small, sweet bit of the day when I got to lay on the carpet and move my body gently from side to side and have a stretch. And we know how protective those behaviours are, and the difference it can make across the lifespan. It's good.
Yeah, and so simple, and probably things that many of us know to be true. We know that exercise makes us feel better. We get the feelings of doing good, but what's great about this research too, and you mentioned earlier, is it brings all the research together in a way that's easily then replicated by anyone who wants to and chooses to.
Yeah, so the researchers that came up with them, Beck, they reviewed, I'm pretty sure it was over 400 pieces of literature, and they looked for the trends that were emerging in the positive psychology material, and then they were asked to narrow them down to the most mentioned themes, and then put them in a package that people could employ and follow. And so that's how they came up with the hand diagram, and each digit represents one of the 5 ways. So I love that it's so simple. And I know I made myself a coronavirus checklist, and as part of, so I had things on it like clean out one cupboard or shelf. I had some, while I was here, I thought, I might as well tidy my house, and some other I had practical things on it like that. But I also had reach out to a friend every day, do something kind for someone else, move my body, study. So doing some sort of, so the way I'm concentrating on lifelong learning over Corona is I'm doing my best to read 30 pages a day of something, and it doesn't matter what it is, but just keeping my mind stimulated in that way. But I wrote the 5 things as part of my checklist, and that's been very helpful, and other people might like to experiment with that too.
I noticed on the 5 Ways to Wellbeing website, there's some great resources for people to tap into. So I'll be sure to put that up on the Birth Sense Handy Contacts page, so people can go there and download some of those resources. But you're saying just maybe make one up for yourself and really personalise it.
Yeah, and I think there was a sheet that I sent you, Beck. There's like a little, you can make a plan And so that will be available on that 5 Ways to Wellbeing. I think it's on one of the Australian websites actually, where we ask, you know, what am I doing now to connect? What do I want to change or do more of? And what's one next step I can take in this area to get started? And yeah, they're good questions for us to consider, and then we can jot it down on a little plan and see how we go. And if we stumble and forget from one day to the next, we can just regroup and start again.
Definitely, definitely. It's not a all or nothing, is it? It's very much a continuum, and if something works, great. If it doesn't, try something new the next day.
Yes.
So, Tiff, you mentioned mindfulness as being aware and taking notice.
Yes.
And mindfulness is something that I also know has a lot of evidence behind it as being a protective factor against anxiety and depression. Can you tell us a little bit about mindfulness generally to start with, for anyone who's not really aware of what it is?
Yeah, it's a moment by moment absorption and awareness of what is happening or what we're experiencing. That's the way I define it, Beck. So say, for example, because you're connected with a lot of families with babies, when we're holding a baby, we could be looking at a mobile device, or we could be fantasizing about what we might make for dinner, for example, or we could notice the weight of the baby in our arms. We could pay attention to the noises that the baby is making, or the other sounds that are available to us in the space. We could allow our attention to rest on the shape of the baby's face, so we can notice what we're seeing, not just with the baby, but also in the environment, and perhaps the tastes or smells that are available to us as well. So say, for example, if we're cuddling a baby and we're also having a little cup of tea, we can notice the warmth of the tea and notice how that feels when we drink the tea, and the flavors that are available to us at that time. So the beautiful part of mindfulness, Beck, is that we can practice it on a train. We can practice it when we're in a chaotic family space. And I love that about mindfulness. And the way I was taught to practice mindfulness was to focus on the 5 senses. What is it that I'm experiencing in this moment? So even sitting with you, Beck, you and I could notice the contact of our sitting bones with the seat, and we can pay attention to the different sounds that are available. So I don't know about your house, but even though we've got double glazing, I can hear there is some sort of machinery outside in the distance. I can hear that, and if I listen carefully, I can hear the wind making its way through the trees. That awareness is very, very powerful and extremely relaxing. So it's good.
What is it that makes that grounding in the moment so relaxing, Tiff?
Well, I think if we're, for lots of us, Beck, if we're projecting into the future, distracted by what might be, that can be fairly psychologically stirring. And also if we're reflecting on the past, especially if we're thinking about something that has displeased us. It's different if we're thinking about something that's brought us pleasure. We call that savouring the experience. So if I think about the soup being on the doorstep, it still brings me pleasure to think about that. Or if I take myself back to family dinners that I've had that I've really enjoyed, or laughing with the children, that's not so bad, because we call that savouring. But if we're going back in our mind to think about an experience that displeased us, that's not very helpful for us psychologically. Likewise, if we're projecting into the future, sometimes a bit of fantasy about how great things will be, having a compelling future, something that we're looking forward to, is okay. But if we're projecting and getting absorbed in a to-do list, that's quite stirring and uncomfortable. So to come back to, what am I doing in this moment? I'm sitting in a lovely room. talking with someone I care about and that cares about me. And hopefully we're creating conversation that's useful to others. If I just allow myself to rest into that, it feels very sweet.
I love that. I've recently participated in an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program. I wanted to learn more about mindfulness, and one of the things that come out of the course was that if you're experiencing adversity or sadness, not to shy away from that.
Yes.
I think what's your opinion about that particular point of view in mindfulness?
Absolutely, Beck. I think that, and I actually think one of the downsides about positive psychology is the emphasis on positive emotions, that there's a benefit to that, but there's also a drawback, that it's become a little bit trendy to pursue happiness and feeling good. And but I actually think it's very healing and appropriate for us to be able to sit in our discomfort. So I've got 3 children, and my middle child moved overseas. She's actually coming back. It's a long story, but she's heading back earlier than planned. But I felt a lot of sadness about her going. She and I exercise together. We have cups of tea together. She'd worked with us in the practice since she was 14. She's now 23. And I was really sad about her moving away. And it's appropriate for me to feel those feelings. And similarly for listeners, one of my friends said to me recently that she's really missing catching up with her girlfriends for coffee, and she feels a great void around that. And another friend of mine has moved down to town and is renting a house to support her son in his sporting career, and also so she could be closer to her work. But now the sport's been put on hold and she's forced to work at home, and she's frustrated because she could be up here at least doing a little wave and drive by to people in her community, and she's not able to do that. And it's really okay for her to feel the frustration of that. And I think it's an important part of mindfulness is opening ourselves, say, for example, to the example we used before, the pleasure of nursing a new baby, but also to allow ourselves to feel the frustration of something not going the way we wanted it to, or the sadness of a loss, for example, or the costs. There are lots of people in our community, Beck, that work for the airlines, and some of those families, both people are suspended from work. And I imagine for some of those people that's very stirring and a bit scary, and it's appropriate for them to feel those feelings.
So, Tiff, where would the line be of you feel the feelings of sadness or worry or whatever feelings are playing out for you, but then how do you stop it from taking over? And I guess when I ask this question, I'm looking for a strategy of how to, yes, tap into feelings of sadness or grief, but then to not let it rule your life too.
Yeah, well, one of the strategies that I use that I was given years ago, my mother died, my adoptive mother died when I was a teenager, and a counsellor that I saw at the time said that I was too busy and that I wasn't allowing enough space for me to feel my feelings. So I literally scheduled it in my diary for Friday afternoons. But then at 5 o'clock I'd head off to aerobics. In the olden days we did aerobics, and I'd head off to an exercise class and get on with things. But I really think, Beck, that for the most part, if we allow ourselves to open up to our feelings, they naturally pass. We really don't have to force it. But if we're really worried about, I think it's one of the myths actually, that if we allow ourselves to feel our feelings that we won't be happy again. I really think that if we open ourselves up and we give ourselves permission to be absorbed in our sadness, that underneath that, healing hovers there. I think it hovers just gently below the surface. And but if we're worried, we can set a bit of a time limit and say, look, I'm going to allow myself to feel my fear about losing my job, or my sadness about my child moving, or whatever it might be that's arising for us, set a timer and then do the 5 ways. You know, go and do something, drop soup for somebody, buy someone a coffee. Like, I know that that's been happening in the community a bit, where members of the public have been buying a coffee for themselves and buying 1 or 2 or 5 more. And so perhaps what we could all practice is giving ourselves permission to feel things, and then getting on with the 5 ways if we feel that we're lingering a little too long.
I love that. Again, it's so practical and sensible, and something we can all do. Tiff, what are the ways, I mean, we're in a weird time for all of us with COVID, but what would you say are some of the things that we could do right now with the restrictions that we're feeling and all under, to apply the 5 ways?
Well, I think they're still really achievable, Beck, even with the limitations that we're facing. And so, say, for example, my friend lent me her lawnmower, and she dropped it off at my house. She made sure that she kept safe distance. So again, that comes back to giving. She lent me her lawnmower, and then she'd been doing some garden work, and she sent photographs of her, funny photographs of her doing her garden work. So one, there was connection and giving, and she achieved it with just those sweet small strategies. And so for all of us, really, if we sit and think about them, most of them we can do. So Monty learning to make bread in the kitchen from watching a YouTube video. We do have to connect in different ways. So if we weren't in COVID, you and I might have met in person, but Zoom's fine, it's working fine. And I know I've got a client who said to me the other day that every Saturday night she has dinner with 14 of her friends. And they all get takeaway food, or mostly they get takeaway food delivered to their homes, and they sit together and they eat. And she said that they're together for about 4 or 5 hours every Saturday night. And I was so moved by that. I found that really lovely. And so she's ticking off connection by doing that. And movement we're allowed to do. We're allowed out of the house, fortunately. We're allowed to run and play and go to parks, and as long as we're respectful. Some of the beaches are shut, which isn't such an issue for us up here. But yeah, movement we can do. I think we can do them all.
Yeah, I do too. It's just about being maybe a little more creative.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for what you shared with us today. It's been such valuable and important information, and I know there's some real pearls of wisdom in what you've shared with each of us. And what I love about this is the information that if it's applied, it's particularly when we talk about the 5 ways, it's potentially something that's going to have a protective factor for all of us, for our kids, for our parents, for anyone that you care to share this information with. It can help the wider community. So I just want to show deep gratitude to you for sharing this with us, Tiff.
Oh, my pleasure, Beck. I just feel so delighted that you asked me, and I love the work that you do, and I really appreciate the chance to connect with you in a new way.
As do I. And certainly something I want to say to anyone who's been listening and who wants to find out more about the 5 ways, you can go to our handy contacts page on the Birth Sense Australia website, where we'll put the link to this amazing research up. And also too, for any of you who are sitting out there and listening to Tiff and about how she approaches things in life and the wisdom that she has, you can also contact Tiff for telehealth appointments for a one-on-one, and I'll pop Tiff's details up on our website as well, if that's okay with you, Tiff.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Beck.
So a big thank you to everyone who's out there and who's listened to our talk today, and you can keep an eye on our social media pages where we do more chatting with what we're calling interviews with experts and friends, where it's our aim to get the right information to you from the right people. And I just want you to all take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll be in touch again soon. Bye. Bye, Tiff.
Thanks, Beck.